Right. Welcome. This is our first research preview series for the fall 2025 admission cycle. My name is Kathleen Rascone, and I'm the Director of Academic Services and also PhD advisor. So I see some familiar faces getting to meet with some of you or see you at other sessions talking about admissions. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass it off to our first presenter, Dr. David McDonald.
Welcome. I'm going to share some slides, so hopefully this will work, and you'll all be able to see that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research. So to just give you an idea, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, who I am. I want to share a little bit of context in terms of the way I'm starting to think about the work that I've been doing. And then I'm going to talk just briefly about some ongoing example projects that I'm doing, mostly with my students, but some of it is also with other faculty. And so you'll get to hear about that, and then open it up for questions. I don't think this will take full 20 minutes for this, and so we can do a couple questions and then we'll switch to Mark after that. So my background, I have an education in actually cognitive psychology, cognitive science. That's where I started with my work from UCLA. And then I went on and got a couple master's degree. I didn't list those here, but then got a PhD from UC Irvine in information and computer science. The types of research projects and research topics that I'm interested in really generally around this idea of how do we think about the way in which people collaborate. Most of my earliest work was around collaboration and understanding collaboration systems. So that's fits in this area called CSCW. Now we talk about that as like social computing. So I do still a lot of work in that. This is, of course, related to HCI. One of the things we like to say is that, you can't do good collaboration without good HCI. So things that happen in CSCW often relate to HCI. More recently, I've been moving toward human-centered AI type topics, and actually that has a strong relationship to the way in which I was trained in cognitive science. My early work in cognitive science at UCLA, we were actually looking at cognitive modeling, trying to understand how do we think about the way people think, in particular doing that with computing. So AI was one of the things that I was interested in really early in my education. Some of the things that I have hobbies. I actually do beekeeping. I call it bee wrangling because I don't know that I keep them very well. And so I do that kind of stuff. And then one of the things I picked up in the last year or so is steel drums. And so I play in a steel drum band. So I sometimes say, yeah, I'm in a band, right? And you got to say that with the appropriate kind of rock and roll attitude. Of course, sometimes people don't think of steel drums as rock and roll, but it's actually kind of fun. So it's a neat thing. So thinking about where things are going, I think a lot of people recognize that we're in the middle of this like AI wave, and AI has been through sort of these three different boom cycles, and two of those were followed immediately by what they call AI winters, or these bust cycles. And one of the things that we might think about now, and that this picture starts to suggest, is that, well, maybe these AI boom bust cycles, maybe this time it's going to be different. And as a human-centered design person, I'd like to think that maybe it can be different. And that may have that we as people who do research in this area may actually have some impacts around that. But I want to set the tone for you so that you can think about this, thinking back to that first wave that really started in the late 40s and through the 50s and then kind of peaked in the 60s. That era, computers still took up like a whole room, and you can see this picture in the lower right. Instead of using vacuum tubes, we used transistors, and that picture on the top shows you the difference. The first four items in that picture are vacuum tubes, and the small thing on the right is a transistor. And of course, now transistors are like the size of the pinhead, so they're even tinier, right? A big mainframe computer around that time generally had maybe 128K of RAM, right? I mean, most of the computers you have on your desk had gigs of RAM. This is just like 120K. Computers could have magnetic disks at that time instead of, say, like tape. but that magnetic disk drive was like the size of a commercial refrigerator. And if you look at that lower right picture, the four guys, immediately behind the four guys, that big case with what looks like a window in it, that's the disk drive. It's like a commercial, the size of a commercial refrigerator. The thing that makes this different, though, and what was really changing was that around that time, researchers and like people outside of government and special organizations, computers were now kind of available to like organizations like universities and companies that had enough money. So people, it's much easier now for people to actually have access to a computer and do something with it. In this environment around the late 50s and 60s is when people started thinking about, well, gosh, computers are smart. They look to be like doing things that people do. And so researchers started this idea around AI and started writing AI programs. And some of those programs were really, really convincing to the people who used them. And one of the examples of that was a Weizenbaum program called ELIZA, which was actually released in 1964. And he did research on that from the mid 60s into the very late 60s, about 4 years he spent on that. And a lot of people thought that this was going to be like transformative to society, right? The same kind of debates we have now about, well, are these types of computers and programs going to take people's jobs? What happens when they control society? People are worried about those same kind of things, and those debates that we have today and we think are so novel, they were going on then as well. And so people were struggling with these ideas. And there was one person who was really kind of trying to think about the role of computing broadly in a really different way. And so I'd like to highlight him and give you a little bit to think about him. And that was this guy named Doug Engelbart. Doug Engelbart is actually really famous. A lot of the things that you use today, he invented in the mid 60s. So he got his PhD and he started at Stanford Research Institute in 1957. And around 1962, he wrote this sort of manifesto, and he wrote it on contract to the Air Force Research Office, so that scientific research office, and it was called Augmenting Human Intellect, a Conceptual Framework. That particular report was so interesting to the Air Force and other government agencies that they plunked a bunch of money at Stanford so that he could start what was called the Augmentation Research Center. And within about 4 or 5 years after that, he had invented this thing called the mouse. He'd invented bitmap displays, that like basically the kind of display you have to do. He invented and demonstrated the use of hypertext. This is how you link things and things. He developed this software that did shared editing at a distance. So over at remote instance, you're like editing the same document. You take this for granted today, but it was like brand new. He invented at that time teleconferencing. He demonstrated split screen teleconferencing, where you were teleconferencing and editing a shared, like almost exactly what we're doing now with little things on the screen. He showed that in something that was known as the mother of all demos. He actually showed it all live, and it was really fascinating. But there's something I really want to kind of point back to, and that is this idea that underlied a lot of his work. He was thinking about this idea of augmentation. And so what does he mean by augmentation? So this is actually right out of his report. By augmentation, we mean increasing the capability of a man. Of course, he was in the 50s, so he didn't talk about men and women are all people, but we would say all people now, right? The capabilities of all people to approach a complex problem and situation, to gain comprehension to suit their particular needs, and to derive solutions to those problems. He's about solving problems, giving people the tools to solve problems. And so this is basically what goes in here. And in some later writing, he talked about it as specifically a human-centered paradigm. This is one of the earliest uses of human-centered, was basically in the 60s, to talk about the way we should think about the design of these types of systems. And the augmentation is basically equipping humans with the skills and know-how, along with any tools necessary to solve these complex problems. This is what he was talking about. And so why I want to kind of push this idea is I think that, we should think about doing design for augmentation, that actually is a really powerful thing, especially when we're thinking about things like AI and human-centered AI. Too often, a technology-centric design focuses on the automation of something. And automation is pitched often as a convenience, and that can be true. It's convenient. But the problem is that those conveniences sometimes come with costs. Costs in terms of how we learn something, costs in terms of how we come to understand things. And so changing to an augmentation viewpoint doesn't necessarily mean removing all of those types of automation. It actually really challenges designers and people who are doing this kind of research to think about, does that automation reduce opportunities for people to learn about their work, to become better at their work, to become better and more satisfied contributors? And I think this is one of the challenge of the race that we're in to try and add AI to everything, is often we perhaps don't think about that augmentation approach and that we focus too heavily on automation. And you can see that in the rhetoric around sort of the hype that's happening in AI today. And I would say that human-centered designers, we should be actually thinking about that. This is the area of research. How do we actually kind of build these systems to do this thing? So some of the types of things that I've been working on, one of these projects that we've been talking about is this notion of a UI sandbox for an AI sandbox for UX professionals. So we started this research with this sort of question: how can we support UX professionals understanding and use of AI models when they're designing some kind of an AI-enabled app? And so this is with one of my PhD students, Meena Murali Kumar. And we really wanted to understand the needs of UX professionals when they work with data scientists or people who are software engineers and they're building these models. How do they come to understand these models, and what are the kinds of things that happen? And so she did some exploratory work interviewing people who are UX professionals in various UX professional roles. And analyzing that, we kind of started to understand that things that are sort of like static representations, maybe not as helpful. And so this idea of the AI sandbox came out of that. And Meena's work, she's starting to think about, like, how does the sandbox help? A lot of AI models are really complex. They're not trivial to understand. They require some specific mathematical capabilities. And so the idea that we're working with is, can some of these sandbox tools help guide a person through maybe sets of steps that maybe an expert statistician might have, but that people who are UX professionals might not have? And so we might start with suggesting little pieces of how an interactive analysis might work. And then that might go to presentation of, like, how the model performs over that. And in the lower right corner, you get these types of curves that illustrate the probabilistic behaviors of the models. But as well, it's associated in the right-hand part of that with qualitative data that is maybe more friendly to a UX professional. And so Meena is in the process of kind of working on this and evaluating this. And so this is work that's still in process. So that's one example. Another example is thinking about how we might help UX professionals prototype. And that is, you know, we don't always have the AI tool available. Sometimes we're still trying to figure out what that AI model and what the AI is going to do. And so a lot of the way UX professionals solve those problems is by thinking through prototyping. How do we do prototypes to make this happen? And so we started asking this question about something called AutoML. AutoML is this idea that what I can do is I can put together in a framework all of these tools, and a person who has no ML experience can just show their data to the system and, like, check some boxes, and they'll get a model out of it that works, right? That's sort of the promise. Of course, it's not quite so cut and dry. And so we decided to understand, like, to what degree a very simple AutoML tool, which is called Teachable Machine, might actually support their thinking about the kinds of prototypes. And so we did this study and we published this work around thinking about how they might, like, solve these problems with AutoML tools. The gist is that, you know, of course, conceptually, it's a really hard problem. And tools that are like AutoML are very friendly, and they're really built for people who are model builders, people who are software engineers and data scientists. And so the change that we went to was starting to think about this idea of, how do you embed that kind of support in tools that are maybe more friendly to UX professionals. And so Kevin went off for a summer and he went to work with some people at IBM. And he built this thing called Canville. And Canville is a plugin for Figma, and effectively it allows you to create templates. And these templates can be shared, they're collaborated across different environments. So multiple UX professionals can be working in the same Figma board and create or sort of version these different templates to kind of see how these types of interactions might work. And these are then, right now, they're supported by LLMs. So LLM as a mechanism for trying to prototype this. This paper is in archive. You can find this paper. It's actually still under review. So this is work that's in process, but really close to being done. In the end, I think Kevin's actually going to go off and work on something slightly different, but this is still an interesting area, which is how can we think about like these types of prototyping tools and make prototyping with AI more accessible to UX professionals. Another area that we're working on is this idea of how do we think about the types of tools that UX professionals use and the way in which AI might actually shift or change their work. And so I'm doing this work with a PhD student named Rachel Zhang and Gary Shea. Gary is a faculty member here in HCDE. And so we started working with this idea, thinking about how you might conduct a heuristic evaluation with like an LLM tool. And the gist is actually that it actually performs relatively well. The two charts in the right show that actually the synthetic or the AI-driven heuristic evaluation actually finds more problems in a heuristic evaluation than five human evaluators. 5 is kind of the number that they talk about. It starts to peak for human evaluators around 5. And so when you're performing at or above 5 human evaluators for heuristic evaluation, you're doing a little bit better. The thing that's fascinating about it, though, is that it has different characteristics. And I'll give you an example. AI is still machine, and so it's brutally systematic. When you ask it to find an error, it'll find that error on every single place it happens. And humans kind of don't do that. Humans will like go, okay, you know, this error, it's this error. And I've seen it multiple places, but they won't tell you about it every single time, right? And so this is one of the things that's just sort of a different characteristic that we have to start thinking about, because of course that can lead to a certain type of overload. And that's some of the work that we're doing on this, is then dealing with like kind of like these overload problems because of sort of the brutal systematic nature of the computer when it's like looking for errors. Lastly, and this actually kind of brings together some of the work that I've done in collaboration in Wikipedia. Some people know that I might know that I've done a lot of work in looking at large collaborations around Wikipedia, is thinking about this issue of like, how do we deal with dispute resolution? So dispute can be good, right? Dispute can actually make articles in Wikipedia better, right? They can help clarify what the point is. I mean, this is in some cases why researchers ask for peer review of their papers. They want someone to critique the paper and tell them what's wrong so that I can fix it, right? But dispute isn't always good, right? Sometimes people get into fights that degrade, and that might make people not want to contribute. And so we started thinking about this issue of like, maybe we can use LLMs to try and help and assist this dispute resolution problem. And there are people who go around Wikipedia and they're tasked with doing dispute resolution. And they actually talk about this. They hate to do this task. It's like, you know, you've got two parties who are fighting and you're going to walk into the middle of it. That's not a desirable thing. So one of the first steps of good dispute resolution is getting people, maybe the involved parties, to think about and agree that that dispute, that problem's the problem we need to solve. And this is a great potential step that LLMs could potentially do, is sort of summarize. And so with Subin Cho and Mark Zachary, we've been started looking at this. One of the things that's actually fascinating about this is that LLMs can generate these kinds of summaries, but people who know Wikipedia and know that community find those summaries a little bit thin and not quite as helpful as they'd like. And so we start talking about in the work that that's under review, that Subin has under review, start talking about this idea of what kind of summaries insiders to Wikipedia need that's distinct from outsiders. And it turns out that there's still a fair amount of work that we have to do to work with an LLM to give it the kind of knowledge that Wikipedia insiders have so that it could potentially help those people agree, yeah, that's the problem we need to solve. Yeah, that's the sort of an approach that we need to get to. The summaries that we produced to do this work, actually they were like, yeah, that's good if you don't really understand Wikipedia. It does a great job summarizing what's going on here. It tells you what the dispute is about, but it's not going to help the resolution. And so this is kind of an interesting thing because this really changes the way we start thinking about work. In this case, particular work that nobody really wants to do. Nobody really wants to step in this. Maybe that's a great role for LLMs. Okay, so that's the last example I have. And so I can open it up for questions, maybe just a couple, and then we can switch to Mark.
Josiah, I see your hand.
Hi, it's actually Misha, but
Nisha.
hi, Professor. Thank you so much for that talk. It's really interesting. So I am applying to the PhD program because I'm really interested in human-centered AI. I am actually a UX professional. I'm a UX engineer though, so I'm on the more technical side of things. What I'm really interested in thinking about when it comes to augmenting with AI is what happens to the identity of the UX professional. I think working with UX designers, I know that it's quite, it's a boon of confidence for them to be able to have designs that work and that they can communicate well. So I was wondering if your projects were looking into that aspect of um, the identity of the designer, how they feel and perceive these AI tools, and how we can uphold their work while also helping them, move faster and actually incorporate AI into their tool.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for your question. So I think one of the things to think about is, the strategies that we're looking at and the kinds of work that we're doing. In some cases is work that's like potentially dependent on other individuals doing it for you, right? So if you work at, say, like a Microsoft and you want like a heuristic evaluation by some experts, you might have a team of 3 or 4 other people around you, and you can go to them and say, help me out. There's an awful lot of UX that's done by a small group, 1 or 2 designers, maybe someone who's doing contract work on their own. And actually things like doing heuristic evaluation, that's not possible without them potentially spending a lot of money, right? So the way we're starting to think about these tools is as an augmentation of the work, not to try and take over the work, right? A lot of the way you're starting to see the pitch of this work is, I'll do the design for you. And there are actually a number of tools that claim they will do that. And that is the automation view, right? I have a tool, that's AI stuff. I'm going to make it do the job of a UX designer, right? And that's not our approach. So I think you're raising an interesting question, which is, so how do these tools change the identity, right? That's an interesting question. So I think I would back off from identity in the same way, because all tools like this, all of these things have transformed the nature of work. And we've got lots of studies about the transformation of the nature of work, right? The way in which certain types of work shift from being seen as a particular type of thing to being another kind of thing, right? And so this is kind of, this actually kind of goes way back. If you know the name Shoshana Zuboff, right? That is a classic piece of work around the nature of the information professional and the way the information professionals were changed over time as a function of the rise of computing and the availability of computing in the workplace. I think this will be very similar. And so I think of it less as studying their identity and more actually around the nature of how their work is going to shift and change, right? I think it will. I mean, I think all work is going to change. It's like, and I think actually we have a huge role in trying to see how it's going to change. And it's either going to like automate people out of their jobs, or we're going to think about how to make them happier with their work. And I think we're trying to think about the place for the tools that hopefully make them a little bit happier and like better. So work's going to change. It's just how do we design that maybe in a more positive way? And identity is, I think you're right. I think there's going to be something about that.
Great question. One other specific question on the presentation we just heard? Alex, yeah,
Um,
Oh, sorry.
I didn't hear. Did somebody?
Oh, someone else started to say something.
I'm not sure
I'll,
who.
I'll,
Yeah, go ahead.
all I was gonna say is, I do a lot of like hands-on stuff, 3D printing tools, things like that. And so when I think of tools, I think of a lot of like the reliability and predictability of, like a hammer will do the same thing every time. And I trust the like integrity of the hammer and things like that. And with the base of some of these being those LLMs, and of course everyone talking about like hallucinations and things like that, these as tools, the reliability of those tools or like the trustworthiness of those tools, what does that factor into what you're researching?
Yeah, actually, it's really fascinating. And Rachel's work did a great job with this. I think there are too many studies where they're like, I mean, again, studies, published work, where people have said, oh, I can kind of apply an LLM to this idea. Look, here it does. It doesn't, right? But you're right. This issue is what's the reliability and sort of validity of that work? Is it somehow stable or unstable over time? And actually, Rachel's work did a really nice job of like tracking how well the heuristic evaluation performed over time and how so I think there is a real challenge here that's actually a good research challenge, which is what are the standards for judging reliability and validity of a result, especially if it's based on, as you're pointing out, something that has sort of a probabilistic characteristic underlying it. And so I think there's a great space of work potentially in that, and thinking about like how how we can make sure that like the tool that we build performs consistently over time. That is, like, if we say it does a heuristic evaluation, it's still going to do a heuristic evaluation. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's a great question. Again, I think Rachel's work did a good job with it. There's some nice things in that. And actually, I was pushing that paper, like, Rachel, you got to get this, and that is the most important part of your paper, is that you did this validity part of it. Because too often it's just overlooked. It's just assumed that I got it to work 3 or 4 times and it'll do it again. It's like, I don't know. I'm a little suspect right about that. So I think it's a great problem. I think this is something that we, as a research community, we gotta hold. I think we gotta raise the bar and ask people to like vet that it actually is reliable. That there's something there. It's not just a one-shot thing that worked, right? So great. Thanks for those questions, and maybe we should go on to Mark.
Thanks. Yeah, let's
And
jump.
I'll stay for the end. There's some Q&A at the end, so I'll stay.
Yeah, thank you. So hold your questions if you still have them for David at the very end, but we'll transfer over to Mark's presentation.
Hello, I'm Mark Haselkorn. I, among other things, direct a center called COSAR, which stands for Collaborative Systems for Security, Safety, and Resilience. It's been around, probably about over two decades now, and people keep throwing more and more money at us. And so in my 20 minutes, I think, I mean, well, who knows how far we'll get. I'll go as far as we go, and then we'll talk. But I think the main thing is, what's the core idea that's leading people to give us such large projects? Why human-centered design? The 3 most recent projects, one was called VCC, for Virtual Coordination Center. You can probably check it out. It basically was a regional project where they said, we have a mobility problem. We have a mobility corridor going through Seattle. It consists of cars and buses and trains, and it's managed by all different kinds of agencies, city and county and state, and some of them are law enforcement, and some of them are non-law enforcement, and some of them, this is their job. They're a Department of Transportation, or they're the state patrol, and they just deal with transportation. In other cases, they're fire departments who have lots of other jobs. Truly complex communities that have a common mission, and how can we enhance the way they work together to achieve that mission? So transportation was one. Another project that we're doing right now is with sound transit, so it's related somewhat to the first one, except here the problem is that they're about to expand sound transit like 400%, and the way they do their command and control and security and things like that, it's got physical limitations, it's got technology limitations. What's their future unified command structure going to look like, and how are they going to implement it? And actually, somebody on the call, Bhumika, you still on the call, is working on that project. If you have any questions about that project, you can talk to Bhumika. But the one I'm going to use, so you can see that we deal in real world problems. There are people doing jobs that that are busy and maybe even don't want to be helped, or so they come out of real situations. So I'm going to use one project, the latest one, to just try to get to the idea of why us. So I'm going to share here, and let's go over here. There we go. Can you see that? Are we good there?
Can you share your screen, Mark?
I think I am. No? Oh,
No.
yes.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
Which one are you looking at? I don't know.
Safeguarding the entire community slide.
Okay, that's good. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So this is a title that the National Science Foundation, this little NSF in the corner, gave. It's for Secure, Safeguarding the Entire Community in the U.S. Research Ecosystem. So this one comes out of the only bipartisan bill that was passed during the previous Trump administration, the CHIPS and Science Act, which probably you've heard of, but was very much focused on who's making the chips that are doing all the things that David was just talking about. And part of this act was a concern that the U.S. makes an extremely large investment in research and development. The federal government, about $500 billion annually, and that there's a lot of value in that, and some of that value was being lost, in some cases to issues of integrity, in some cases issues of bad actors. And buried in the CHIPS and Science Act was the mandate for the National Science Foundation to create something to help make U.S. research more secure. When the Biden administration came along, they probably could have ignored it, but instead this is a presidential memorandum where they augmented this notion of how are we going to help make research more secure with something called an RSISAO, a Research Security and Integrity Information Sharing Analysis Organization. And lots of people put lots of effort in setting this up and getting money from Congress to create this thing. And they were all research security specialists, and they all expected that they would get the money. Why would they give the money to us and not to these research security specialists? There were this is a very visible, lots of oversight. There's additional guidance on implementing these things. This is a subcommittee, a joint subcommittee of both the House and the Senate. So this is very high profile stuff. It's pretty scary stuff, actually. And they defined a need for an entity that would empower the research community to make security informed decisions, provide information. The IHEs are institutes of higher education. So all the universities, nonprofit research institutions, small and medium-sized businesses, very complex audience. And in the proposal, they outlined a bunch of duties, clearinghouse, frameworks, information sharing, all kinds of ideas on how this entity could help make research more secure. And then imagine you know that this has been going on for a long time. You are not a security specialist, and you're going to put together with a lot of friends a proposal to compete with all these people who've been working on this for a very long time. What would you write? Oh, a little bit about how new this is. It just started 2 months ago, went through a whole series of things over 23. You know, you work on this for a very long time, and it finally is just starting. So, oops, I'm not sure you can see the very top line. Imagine in one room every person who has anything to do with the job that directly impacts security and integrity of government-funded research. A room filled with researchers, research administrators, funding agency program managers, just this huge diverse group with a common overlapping mission, which is successful national research. And this room is special, not just because it can hold everybody, but it empowers them to collectively envision, create, try out, modify, implement, and maintain tools, capabilities, processes, resources that they can use to enhance security and integrity of the research endeavor, what we call co-creation. In addition, these collective activities, they not only produce tools and produce capabilities, but they also, in the act of being put on the co-design team of working together, they create common ownership of the issues and common adoption of the solutions because they own those, they make those. And you create a sense of community trust and collaboration, and you enhance the ability of these people to do their work. And in the proposal, we described the secure center and a shared virtual environment, which would be the organization and the special room that will make this vision a reality. So we didn't say we were the greatest experts in security. We said we know how to take complex communities and get them to work together, to get how to give them, empower them to own their own solutions, define the problem, and these are problems that only they can solve. And we empower them to define those problems and solve those problems. But they can't, but they've never had so we are in a sense their construction agency. And so we like to say to them that this $67 million investment, which NSF went ahead and gave us 50 million of it for the Secure Center, and another 17 million to the people who expected to get this award, the risk assessment people, the analytics people. They got us all to work together. And we like to say that this 60 million investment is not in us, it's in them. They've been talking about this problem forever. They sit around tables and they talk about solutions and they talk about issues, but they don't have the capacity to build those solutions, to collaboratively come together and iteratively build something and get it back and say, oh, I like this part, but I don't like this part, and collaboratively improve that thing until it's something where they say, okay, this is ready to work. So that's the basic magic sauce. What we say about this one, after we talk about the community, as I've said, you can do it by roles, but it's also by homes. They're different, and communities are different in many different ways. What we say is, so this is not business as usual. We don't do business as usual. And in this case, there's a lot of reasons why it's not business as usual. The first is that we get the money, but we can't solve the problem. The community owns the problem, and they own the solutions, and only they can solve it. So we have to get them to want to work with us, and they have to believe that we are there for them, not for us. In this particular one, it's interesting because security processes are owned by administrators who actually usually administer what the researchers do. But in this case, the administrators are like subject matter experts. And so another pitch we made was we said, you know, you administrators out there who usually serve researchers, this is about you. You're the researcher in this case. So we're switching switching roles. That's been interesting. We usually agencies give money and then they let other people solve problems, but we said, hey, you guys are part of the community. You have to be at the table too. And usually they give an award and then they say, okay, go solve the problem. But in this case, we all worked together and said, this isn't about that. We want the best of every proposal. And we even want people who didn't propose at all. So this was about solving the problem, not just getting the money and doing the job. So we can't complete the work without the community. You have to engage and involve the community in the solution. And we don't just create tools and capabilities, which is what they thought they wanted, but you actually create an environment in which you deliver those tools, but also in which they have a trusted space to work together and share information and practices. Now that's going to be a challenge. The security of the SVE is going to be an interesting challenge. How are we doing on time? 2 minutes. It can't be one size fits all. You have to design it so that the solutions work differently for different people. In this case, one of the biggest challenges is in that guidance that I showed early on from Congress. They said, okay, when you implement this bill, if you're at an institution that does 50 million or more annually of research, you are required to have a research security program. And that research security program has to have the following required components. It has to do export control. It has to do, cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't do 50 million, you don't have that requirement. Does that mean you're not part of the community? Certainly not. A lot of, first of all, there are just equity issues of minority serving, what we call emerging research institutions. You don't want those to be left out. But also, agencies encourage Stanford to partner with minority serving institutions in their proposals. So if you're trying to increase the security of your effort, and Stanford has, 30 people hired to do different aspects of research security, and the minority partner has one person who does it all, who are you going to go, where are you going to go, who's the weak link going to be? So the notion that somehow, the size of your program is a definer of the security threat is really just a mistaken idea. So, but the solution for that, if you have 30 people working on the problem versus one person working on the problem, the solution is going to look very different. So you have to accommodate diversity, and you have to have it work differently for different people. The biggest thing is you got to get them to build together. They're different, they're diverse, they're competitive even. And yet, if you can get them to come around the build table, the design and development table, and put them all on the same team, you know, they move from what they've been doing in the past, which is sitting at conferences and arguing over stuff and then going home, to, oh, we're building something. If we have a disagreement, we actually have to decide what to do about it. We have to move forward. Getting them on the same build team really changes the game, and that's really important. I'm going to stop there, I think. We have 5 regional centers, we have expert areas and value areas. The point is, this is more about community-centered design and co-creation than it is about the way people usually think about security, which is compliance and rules and firewalls and things like that. This is, you know, and it doesn't matter if it's security or transportation, whatever. That's the secret sauce that we work on. We know how to do community-centered design and co-creation in a large, complex environment, complex job, complex community. What might we go? Empowering people and organizing U.S. research to better, you know, that's sort of like the slogan. We're empowering others to do things. I think that's the end. Some things we learned.
Hey, Mark, we have questions already. If you
Good. So I'm going to stop sharing.
I think I saw Jana Mercy first.
Hi, good morning, or yeah, it's morning over there. Good morning. I currently work for a consultant firm, and we work for the US DOT Intelligent Transportation Systems Joint Program Office. So we're doing a lot of cohorts for V2X deployments and for connected and automated vehicles, electric vehicles, cohorts, and things like that. But what I find is that we have issues in engagement, which is one of the things you were speaking about. And I think maybe partially because you guys are building something and we're kind of not building, but I was wondering what other strategies you're hoping to implement, if you have them in mind, of how to actually get people to engage without, especially without compliance that they have to.
Yeah. Well, it is, first of all, it is easier when the government comes and says you have to have a research security program because you have $50 million worth of annual research, let's say. Well, so they're going to have to do that. Now they could each do their own thing. They could each say, what is a cybersecurity component of a research security program, and then they'd create it, and then they'd show it to the feds, and the feds would look at it and say, okay, that passes, or it doesn't pass, and everybody'd be doing their own thing, right? Or we could get everybody around the co-design table. We could all decide what a cybersecurity component of a research security program is. We could even have the feds at the table helping us make the decision along the way, and then we're done. And then we would facilitate everybody getting it. Now, which of those two scenarios makes more sense? And yet, you know, the individual one that's more work for the feds and more work for the people who have, for the agencies that have to comply. That's the way we do it now. I mean, co-creation just makes so much sense. The thing is, it's hard to do, and that's why, having done it successfully in the past, it is an exciting position to be in, because you learn a lot when you're doing it. I couldn't tell you in 20 minutes all the things we learn, obviously, but yeah, it's once you get people to drink the co-creation Kool-Aid, then you're in a really great shape. But that's the trick.
Thank you.
Sure.
Nicholas, I saw your hand too.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Haselkorn. That was a super interesting talk. I have some questions about the specifics of the threats that you're talking about. Are we talking about, cybersecurity threats exactly, or research integrity? That can mean a lot of different things. So kind of point one is, could you give some examples of the threats that you're
Sure.
talking about? And question two would be, could you give examples of the imagined solutions that you hope co-creation will come up with and how they might differ from the no co-creation version? And then the last part of this is, how do you imagine a PhD student helping you do this? And what would be the role of a doctoral student in that work?
So one of the, I'm going to share again real quickly, because one of the slides I skipped towards the end. Okay, let's go back up a little bit. It was the what might we build? So here are some examples. I was just talking about building shared components of a research security program. We might do that. We might, the analytics group especially is going to be working on risk assessments of, so when, in a risk assessment, it could be upfront, like what are the risks in this project before I take it on? Or it could be an ongoing kind of assessment. And of course, the other, since it mentions the international collaboration issue, it'd be easy to be secure. If we just didn't work with anybody else, or that would be a big step in reducing, bad actors coming in and stealing stuff. But that would be protecting the value of research by taking away where the value comes from. Collaboration is, the blood of research. It's how we do great things. And so we need to balance security with enhancing collaboration. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I just want to talk. When we became a finalist for this, and they had what they call a blue ribbon panel that we had to present to, and we did our presentation and we showed them the VCC and how we had done what we had done with transportation. The first question I got when we were done with that presentation was somebody said, okay, an American researcher goes to a conference in France. They meet somebody there who's in the same field. They start talking, they get excited, they share information, they start collaborating, and they create CRISPR. Then, true story. And the question was, how are you going to make sure that keeps happening? How are you going to do security? And and you're not going to keep people from doing that kind of thing. So that balance of I know I'm not answering your question, but it's such an important point. Is exciting. I'll show you something else that I get all the time now. I'm not going to show it. We don't have time. People fishing to gain trust. I get graduate students coming to, emailing me, except I can tell they're not real. And they're just trying to get me to somehow form a relationship, gain some trust so that they can get into what we're working on. That's, how do you deal with that? Those things are usually often done by AIs, and they probably go out to hundreds of people. So maybe by sharing information, we can make it easier for people who don't have time. A researcher gets this and they don't have time to vet every email they get or every request they get. So how could we do a collaborative solution where where instead of me having to vet it, I just say, is this legit? And I can get an analysis of that. There are some pretty obvious clues usually on those. So anyway, I didn't fully answer your question and didn't go
Thanks,
through all
Mark.
those things with my
All right.
bill, but yeah.
I'm gonna cut in. If we, Alex, I see your hand up, but I would like to see if anybody else who hasn't asked a question yet has one final question for either Mark Haselkorn or David McDonald, and if not, then we'll swing over to Alex. Okay, Alex, take it away.
Sorry, the window was covering up the mute button. I was just gonna say, like, I work for a government contractor, and so seeing some of the bureaucracy of these different organizations trying to work together is like a day-to-day thing. Taking a little break in the middle of the day to attend this. But with co-creation, how do you balance like that simplicity of a one-size-fits-all solution with a bunch of these? I'm sure some of these places come back and say like, no, that doesn't fit for us. Like, how do you? Hard to imagine 100% buy-in from all the stakeholders. So what helps you decide that it fits enough, like a solution fits enough?
So we don't decide that. They do. You have to truly give up control of this stuff. They not only co-design it, but that doesn't end when you field it. If they want to make a change, they can make a change. They have to truly own it, and they have to be able to customize it, and they have to be able to make it work for them. Because if they don't have that control, if they are not being empowered, they're just not going to play, and it's not going to happen. So you have to really use your expertise to guide them and empower them, but they have to own it.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone for attending today, and a special thank you to our two presenters and taking the time. I'll stay on a couple minutes if anyone has general questions about the application, anything related to that. But thank you so much, Mark and David.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.